You think you know the story of the Minotaur? Think again. This legendary creature hides secrets that nobody has ever revealed to you. And I can guarantee that after watching this video, your understanding of Greek mythology will never be the same. Stay until the end, because I'm going to unveil absolutely mind-blowing details about this story, including why this terrifying creature might have actually existed in reality. Buckle up, because this journey into the darkest myth of ancient Greece is going to blow your mind. Picture yourself for a moment in the shoes of a young Athenian over 3,000 years ago. You've just learned that your name has been drawn in a lottery for a journey from which nobody ever returns. Destination: Crete. Mission: to feed the most monstrous beast humanity has ever known. This was exactly the nightmare that young Athenians lived through during the era of Cretan domination. But before diving into this terrifying story, let me tell you how this monster came to be. Because trust me, the truth is stranger than fiction. It all begins with Minos, the all-powerful king of Crete. This guy wasn't the type to mess around with power, and when his brothers tried to steal his throne, he decided to prove his divine legitimacy in a rather spectacular way. He turned to Poseidon, the god of the seas, and asked him for a sign. His prayer was simple: "Send me the most beautiful bull the earth has ever seen, and I will sacrifice it in your honor." Poseidon, probably amused by this request, granted his wish and made surge from the waves a bull of breathtaking beauty, white as sea foam and imposing as a mountain. The problem is that when Minos saw this magnificent creature, he couldn't help but think, why sacrifice such a marvel? So he kept the bull for himself and sacrificed an ordinary beast instead. Big mistake. Very big mistake. Poseidon wasn't the type to appreciate being mocked, and his revenge was diabolically cruel. Instead of punishing Minos directly, he decided to target his wife, Pasiphae. Poseidon struck the queen with a consuming and unnatural passion for the white bull. Pasiphae, once wise and respectable, found herself consumed by a desire she couldn't control. Desperate, she turned to Daedalus, the most brilliant engineer of his time, the same man who would later create Icarus's wings. Daedalus, faced with the queen's pleas and probably terrified by the consequences of refusal, designed a hollow wooden cow so realistic it could fool any animal. If you're starting to grasp the truly disturbing dimension of this story, you're right to feel uncomfortable. What happened next gave birth to the Minotaur. And honestly, when you think about it, this creature was doomed from conception. Born from this impossible union, the Minotaur had the body of a man, but the massive head of a bull. His real name was Asterios or Asterion, but nobody called him that. He had become the Minotaur, literally the bull of Minos, the king's living shame. By the way, if this story fascinates you as much as it does me, and you want to discover other secrets of mythology that nobody talks about, remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I regularly publish content about the most fascinating mysteries of ancient history, and trust me, you won't be disappointed with what's coming. Minos, confronted with this monstrosity that was the direct result of his own greed, made a radical decision. He ordered Daedalus to build a prison so complex that even if someone managed to enter it, they could never escape. Thus was born the Labyrinth, this architectural marvel that became one of the most legendary constructions of antiquity. This wasn't a simple garden maze with well-trimmed hedges. No, it was an underground structure with endless corridors, stairs that led nowhere, doors that opened onto walls, a nightmare of stone and marble where even the echo of your own footsteps would eventually drive you insane. The Minotaur was imprisoned at the heart of this labyrinth, and this is where the story becomes truly dark. This creature, half man, half beast, had retained enough humanity to suffer from its condition, but enough bestiality to become dangerous when hunger tormented it. Minos then established a terrifying tribute. Athens, which had lost a war against Crete, had to send every 7 years 14 young people, 7 boys and 7 girls, to feed the monster. Imagine the terror this represented for Athenian families. Your children were literally fed to a legendary beast, whose true nature nobody really knew. But here's what makes this story even more disturbing. The Minotaur wasn't just a wild animal. Testimonies from that era suggest he had retained a form of human intelligence, which made his captivity and condition even more tragic. He was aware of what he was, aware of his monstrosity, and this awareness perhaps made him even more dangerous. They say he could sometimes cry like a man, but roar like a beast when anger took hold of him. For years, this macabre system functioned. Athenian ships would arrive with black sails, symbol of mourning, and leave empty, abandoning 14 young lives promised to certain death. Until the day Theseus decided enough was enough. This prince of Athens, son of King Aegeus, was everything opposite to the Minotaur. Where the monster represented bestiality and chaos, Theseus embodied heroism and order. He volunteered to be part of the sacrificial contingent, not to die, but to kill the beast once and for all. When Theseus arrived in Crete, something unexpected happened. Ariadne, Minos' daughter, fell head over heels in love with him. And unlike her mother Pasiphae, her love was perfectly normal and human. Ariadne knew that if Theseus entered the labyrinth without help, he would share the fate of all the others. So she concocted a plan with Daedalus's help. She gave Theseus a ball of thread, that famous thread of Ariadne that entered history, and explained how to navigate the labyrinth. The plan was ingeniously simple. Theseus had to tie the thread to the entrance and unwind it as he progressed. This way, even in the most complex meanderings of the labyrinth, he could find his way back to the exit. But he still had to survive his confrontation with the Minotaur. The battle between Theseus and the Minotaur is one of the most epic confrontations in all of mythology. On one side, you had this massive creature, half man, half bull, who knew every corner of his underground domain and had the brute strength of a wild bull. On the other, a hero armed only with his sword, his courage, and his human cunning. Legend tells that the combat lasted for hours. In the near total darkness of the labyrinth, you could hear the monster's roars echoing through the corridors, mixed with Theseus's war cries. Finally, intelligence triumphed over brute force. Theseus managed to kill the Minotaur, thus freeing Athens from this bloody tribute. He then followed Ariadne's thread to exit the labyrinth with the other young people who had survived, and they all fled toward Athens. But the story doesn't end there, and what follows is just as tragic as the beginning. In his hasty escape with Ariadne, Theseus made a fatal error. He had promised his father Aegeus to hoist white sails if he returned victorious, or to keep the black sails if he failed. In the euphoria of victory and the rushed departure, he completely forgot to change the sails. When Aegeus saw the ship approaching with its black sails, he believed his son was dead. Mad with grief, the king threw himself from the cliff tops into the sea, which has since borne his name, the Aegean Sea. Thus, even in victory, the Minotaur's curse continued to claim victims. But wait, because here's the truly fascinating part of this story. At the beginning of the 20th century, British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans made a discovery that revolutionized our understanding of the Minotaur myth. While excavating in Crete, he discovered the ruins of the Palace of Knossos, an architectural complex so vast and labyrinthine that many now think it was the true labyrinth of legend. This palace was the center of Minoan civilization, one of the most advanced of the Bronze Age. And get this, throughout this palace, we find frescoes depicting bulls and ritual bullfighting scenes. These Cretans literally worshipped bulls, and they practiced an extremely dangerous sport where young acrobats would leap over charging bulls. Many of these young people died in these spectacles, particularly foreigners who were forced to participate. Some historians now think that the story of the Minotaur might be a mythological interpretation of these very real ritual sacrifices. The young Athenians sent to Crete perhaps weren't literally fed to a monster, but forced to participate in these deadly games with sacred bulls. In this perspective, the Minotaur wouldn't be a unique creature, but rather the symbolic representation of all those bulls that killed young people in the palace arena. This theory is all the more troubling because it suggests that behind every great myth often lies a historical truth distorted by time and oral tradition. The labyrinth of the Palace of Knossos was so complex that visitors would actually get lost in it. The corridors wound without apparent logic, stairs sometimes led into the void, and certain rooms had no visible exit. For foreigners brought by force to this place, it must have really seemed like a death trap designed by a diabolical genius. There's also a fascinating psychological dimension to this story. The Minotaur represents what's darkest in human nature, our animal instincts that coexist with our conscience. This is why this creature continues to fascinate us today. It embodies the ancestral fear of losing our humanity, of becoming monsters guided only by our lowest appetites. Daedalus, the architect of the labyrinth, also deserves our attention. This man was a genius, capable of creating technological marvels that his era struggled to understand. But his genius led to his downfall. After helping Theseus escape, Minos had him imprisoned in his own labyrinth with his son Icarus. The irony was cruel. The man who had designed the perfect prison found himself trapped in it. It was then that he had the idea of creating wings of wax and feathers to escape through the air, giving birth to the other famous myth of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun. The influence of the Minotaur myth on our modern culture is absolutely remarkable. Think about it. How many movies, books, video games use this narrative structure? The hero who penetrates a labyrinthine place to face a monster, guided by the love of a woman who gives him the keys to survival. This archetypal structure is found everywhere, from Alien to Resident Evil, through Arthurian legends and modern fairy tales. Even the concept of the labyrinth has transcended its mythological context to become a universal metaphor. When we talk about getting lost in the labyrinth of bureaucracy or navigating the meanderings of a complicated relationship, we unconsciously use the imagery of this 3,000-year-old story. Ariadne's thread has become synonymous with a saving solution in an apparently hopeless situation. What makes the story of the Minotaur even more powerful is that it deals with universal themes that still resonate today. The corruption of power, illustrated by Minos, who refuses to keep his word to the gods. The consequences of our actions falling on innocents, like Pasiphae, who pays for her husband's greed. The tragic nature of existence, represented by the Minotaur himself, a monster, despite himself, prisoner of a condition he didn't choose. There's even a modern reading that sees in the Minotaur a representation of difference and social marginalization. This creature, rejected by society because of its appearance and origins, locked up and fed like an animal, could symbolize all those whom our societies exclude because they don't conform to established norms. The death of the Minotaur also marks a symbolic turning point in the history of civilization. It's the moment when intelligence and strategy definitively triumph over brute force and animal instinct. Theseus doesn't defeat the monster through physical strength alone, but thanks to his preparation, Ariadne's help, and his ability to use the tools at his disposal. It's in a way, the victory of civilization over barbarism. The Minotaur's legacy in art is equally impressive. From antiquity to our days, hundreds of artists have depicted this creature and its story. Picasso dedicated an entire series of engravings to it, exploring themes of violence and bestiality. In literature, Jorge Luis Borges wrote fascinating short stories about labyrinths, drawing directly from this myth to explore the meanderings of the human mind. The real lesson of the Minotaur story is perhaps that our most terrifying monsters are often the reflection of our own flaws. Minos created the Minotaur through his greed and pride. Cretan society kept it alive through its cruelty and indifference. And we, what monsters do we create through our actions or inaction? This millennial story continues to challenge us because it touches something fundamental in human experience. It reminds us that behind every monster often lies a tragedy, that behind every labyrinth there's a guiding thread for those who know how to look for it, and that even faced with the most insurmountable challenges, intelligence and courage can triumph. So the next time you feel lost in a labyrinth, whether professional, personal, or existential, remember Theseus and his thread of Ariadne. And also remember that even the most terrifying monsters have an origin, a story, and perhaps even a hidden humanity that it's up to us to discover or reveal. That's the real magic of mythology. It gives us tools to understand our world and our era, even millennia after its creation. The Minotaur didn't die in its labyrinth 3,000 years ago. It still lives in our nightmares, our artistic creations, and our daily metaphors. And that's exactly why these stories deserve to be told, again and again, generation after generation.